Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about the old NYW&B train station. Yes, so let's hand it off to David and Michael, who will give us a little bit about the history of the NYW&B station. Michael and David?
Thank you. Well, the NYW&B station was built and almost complete in May 1912.
Yes, however, the station was then shut down December 31st, 1937 due to the lack of people showing up. Because of the Great Depression, it caused the development of the train to then be postponed until after World War II, eventually losing money and then becoming bankrupt. Back to you guys.
Wow, thank you for all that interesting information.
Yes, the location of the station actually helped Heathcote flourish. As more people would move to the neighborhood, more people would ride the trains and then earn more money to pay off its debts.
On top of all of that, the train was all electric. This means that the train can start and stop faster than other trains of its time, and it was quieter and cleaner. All these qualities encouraged people to ride the NYW&B.
Wow, that's very interesting. Now we're going to go to an exclusive interview with a man named Otto M. Vondrak, who works closely with trains.
What do you do for a living?
Alright, well, my name is Otto Vondrak. I'm a graphic designer. I grew up in Westchester County, and currently I'm the associate editor for Railfan and Railroad magazine. I've always been interested in trains since I'm a little kid. My dad got me a train set when I was like 5 years old, and I was just always interested in how trains work, and I think it just kind of snowballed from there, learning about how trains work and the history behind them.
How did you get involved working with the NYW&B?
That's a funny story because it's actually my dad who got me involved in that. My dad grew up in the Bronx on Westchester Esplanade near what is now the Pelham Parkway station on the number 5. And he remembers when it was the New York, Westchester, and Boston. He would tell me these stories about the railroad, which was long gone. You couldn't find any traces of it. So it was just very fascinating to hear these stories about this railroad and how it worked. And you couldn't find any traces of it. You had to look really hard, so it was like a ghost railroad. So just the more I heard his stories, I started looking for stuff, and I'd find books in the libraries, and I met other people who were also doing research on the railroad. And from my dad sparking my interest to meeting the other people who had other pieces of the puzzle, I started doing my own research on the railroad, and I helped write a couple of books about it and a website.
So this train was created to link the Bronx to White Plains. Can you tell us what was so important about linking these two places?
The interesting thing about the whole railroad was it had been planned since like the 1870s, and it took them about 25 years to get enough support together to get the company going and to actually get enough money together to start construction. And that's actually a long, complicated history. But the short story is they built this railroad on spec. They were speculating that if they built this railroad, it would serve an area that didn't have any transportation yet. More people would come out here to live. People want to move out to the suburbs because it's nicer than living in the city. And they'll move out to the suburbs if there's a cheap, efficient way to get them back to the city to their jobs. So essentially, they picked White Plains because White Plains was the biggest city in Westchester in terms of how far north they would go. And there was no real transportation through this little valley that included like Chester Heights and Pelham and Eastchester and parts of Scarsdale. So they built their railroad in an area where there weren't any other railroads. You had the New Haven line to the east, and you had the New York Central's Harlem Division to the west, so they built in between those two areas. They built their terminal in the Bronx at a place called Harlem River, right on the water, because they couldn't afford to tunnel or get into New York City. That'd be very expensive. And what happened was, in the 1870s, up until the turn of the century, New York City was building north. When Vanderbilt built Grand Central Terminal on 42nd Street, that was like in the middle of nowhere. But the city grew north to meet him. And now Grand Central is in Midtown. So the people who were building the Westchester, they speculated, well, the city's going to keep growing north, and the Bronx waterfront will be the new Midtown. This will be perfect. Then the zoning laws of 1918 were passed, and that pretty much kept all commercial construction below 59th Street, which stopped the city from growing north. And so then the Westchester was stuck with this awkward terminal in the Bronx, and the best they could do was there were two subway lines that connected there, so you rode the Westchester to Harlem River, and then you paid another nickel to ride the subway to get to wherever your final destination was. So it was kind of by accident and kind of on purpose that they connected White Plains to the Bronx. And then also there was a second branch that was built in the 20s that linked up to Port Chester. So it went through places like Port Chester Rye, Harrison, Larchmont, came together in Mount Vernon, and then down to the Bronx.
In your opinion, why is it so important to keep historical landmarks?
Sure. It's kind of a question that we struggle with in the preservation community. You know, what's worth saving? How do you decide what to keep around? And in terms of the Westchester, there's not that many examples of stations left. When the railroad was abandoned, it's really hard to find evidence of the railroad today because so much of it was destroyed, removed. The company practically gave away their property to the villages to pay the back taxes that they owed, and in turn the villages got rid of the station so they could use the land, they could sell the land or build on it themselves. So the fact that Heathcote Station even exists is kind of a miracle. And the fact that someone came in when the village sold it to that real estate office, the fact that it got saved and the fellow wanted to restore it is kind of amazing because most people don't appreciate old stuff and they think old stuff is bad for some reason, so they'll try to modernize it or make it better. But really I think it's important to save artifacts in general because society is judged on what you save and what you decide is important. And I think it's just kind of interesting to see where we've been, you know, by the things that we've saved and that we value. You go to a museum and the things that they choose to show you in a museum, we think these things are important because they show you something about how we developed as a society and a culture. And I think it's interesting to see how in terms of the Westchester, it was a railroad with so much potential. I mean, they built the best railroad they could. It was a beautiful structure. It was an efficient system, and the only reason it failed was because it was just built at the wrong time. And I think it's kind of interesting to have a monument like that in terms of the Heathcote Station, where you can say, "Oh man, if only this thing lasted another few years, it might still be here today." And you look at you look at how built up this whole area is, how much it probably could benefit if the railroad was still here. Otherwise, you know, if it wasn't for people like you who are interested and curious, or people like me who write books, you know, not many people are interested in a railroad that was tore up more than 80 years ago, 70 years ago. So either you preserve what you have, or you're doomed to repeat history.
Hey, did you know that the old NYW&B station was styled off of classical and simple Italian architectural form?
Oh hey, didn't see you there. With high-level platforms that allowed passengers to quickly exit and enter the trains.
Good point. The interior also featured polished marble and arched ceilings.
A man named J.P. Morgan owned the station. He was a very famous American financier, banker, and art collector.
The two symbols on the front of the building represent the family crest of Heathcote.
Pardon me. Let's try this again. Not now.